In a town where shadows of prejudice linger and the lines between right and wrong blur, Officer Ethan McCall's life takes an unexpected turn when he confronts Isaac Turner, a man who, by the very next day, becomes his new boss as chief of police. As Ethan's past biases clash with Isaac's mission to change a broken system, they must face a common enemy from Isaac's past that threatens everything they've both fought for. In this gripping tale of redemption, courage, and transformation, will Ethan find the strength to step out of the shadows and fight for a future where justice prevails? The sky over Greenville was painted in ominous shades of gray as Officer Ethan McCall pushed the door open to the police station, the scent of rain in the air. He tugged off his cap, running a hand through his short brown hair, and shook off the uneventful hours of his shift. At only 26, he'd been on the force for 3 years, but it felt like a lifetime. "Long day?" Captain John Riley asked, his graying eyebrows lifting as Ethan approached the front desk. "Same as always," Ethan muttered, his voice carrying a hint of frustration. "Nothing ever happens around here. It's like I'm stuck on the same patrol every damn day." Riley chuckled. "Careful what you wish for, kid. Sometimes, no action is the best kind of action." Ethan's eyes narrowed. "I joined this job to make a difference, not to be a glorified babysitter." Riley sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I get it. We've all been there. But listen, if you're looking for excitement, try not to find it in Jackson Heights, all right? Just keep your head down. Folks there don't need more trouble than they already have." Ethan bristled at the comment. "I'll be fine, Captain." "Just stay sharp," Riley warned, his tone softening. "You're a good cop, Ethan. Don't let impatience make you a bad one." Ethan nodded but felt the sting of the words. His frustration with the monotony of his job pushed him to leave the station with more vigor than necessary. He slammed the door of his patrol car and drove toward Jackson Heights, ignoring the captain's advice. Ethan's frustration pushes him to patrol Jackson Heights, setting the stage for the encounter that will change everything. The rain had started, a light drizzle that quickly soaked into Ethan's uniform as he drove through the narrow streets of Jackson Heights. The buildings seemed to close in, their brick walls lined with memories of hardship and resilience. Ethan saw a man walking ahead, tall, well-dressed in a suit that looked out of place against the backdrop of the neighborhood. Ethan slowed the car, eyes narrowing. "What's a guy like you doing here?" he muttered to himself. He pulled over, stepping out and approaching the man. "Hey, you there?" Ethan called out, projecting the authority he didn't quite feel. "Where do you think you're going?" The man paused, turning to face him. His dark eyes met Ethan's with an unyielding calm, a strength that caught Ethan off guard. "Good evening, officer," he replied. "Is there a problem?" Ethan stepped closer, attempting to tower over him. "You seem out of place. Mind telling me what you're doing in this neighborhood?" "Walking," the man answered simply. "On my way to a meeting." Ethan frowned. "A meeting? In a suit like that? Let's see some ID." The man sighed, pulling out his wallet and handing over his identification. "Isaac Turner," he said. "Now, may I ask what this is about?" Ethan glanced at the ID but didn't really look at it. "Doesn't seem like you're from around here," he remarked, his voice laced with suspicion. "I've lived here most of my life," Isaac replied, his tone unflinching. "And I don't need to justify my presence to you, officer." Ethan felt a surge of anger. "You do when I say you do," he snapped. "Or is there something you're hiding?" Isaac's eyes hardened, but his voice remained steady. "No, officer, there's nothing I'm hiding. I'm simply on my way, just like anyone else." Just then, Ethan's radio crackled to life with a call from the station. "All units, we need immediate backup at the corner of Main and 5th. Officer down." Ethan gritted his teeth, thrusting Isaac's ID back into his hand. "Get out of here before I change my mind," he growled. Isaac took back his ID, his eyes never leaving Ethan's. "Have a good evening, officer," he said before turning and walking away, leaving Ethan standing in the rain, his pulse pounding in his ears. Ethan's aggression and Isaac's calm demeanor reveal their opposing natures, foreshadowing the power shift that is about to occur. Ethan drove back to the station, his mind replaying the encounter, an uneasy feeling gnawing at him. He had acted with authority, yet something about the man's composure unsettled him. There was a dignity in Isaac's stance, a calmness that challenged Ethan's sense of control. The station was buzzing when he arrived, and Captain Riley shot him a look. "You all right?" Ethan nodded, but Riley could see through him. "You get too deep into something out there?" "Nothing I couldn't handle," Ethan said, shrugging off the question. But inside, the seeds of doubt had taken root. Ethan's unease grows, signaling the first crack in his confidence. The next morning, Ethan returned to the station, trying to shake off the lingering tension from the previous night. The atmosphere was electric with whispers. "What's going on?" Ethan asked one of his colleagues. "New chief starting today," she replied, eyes wide. "Apparently he's some big shot from community outreach." Ethan's stomach twisted. He hadn't heard about any new chief. "Attention!" Captain Riley called out, gathering everyone in the main room. "I want you all to meet your new chief of police. He's been brought in to help us rebuild." Ethan barely listened, his thoughts still caught in last night's encounter, until he heard Riley's voice. "Please welcome Chief Isaac Turner." Ethan's head snapped up. There, standing at the front of the room, was Isaac, the man from the night before, now wearing a badge on his suit jacket. Isaac's gaze swept across the room, landing on Ethan, who felt his blood run cold. "Thank you, Captain Riley," Isaac began, his voice calm but firm. "I'm here to ensure that we serve and protect every member of this community, and that includes everyone in this room. Together, we will build something better." Ethan stared, frozen. How had this happened? What would it mean for him? Isaac's introduction as chief sets the stage for Ethan's journey toward redemption. After the meeting, Ethan hung back, still reeling. Isaac caught his eye, walking over with purposeful steps. "Officer McCall, isn't it?" Isaac asked, his tone polite but with an unmistakable edge. "We met yesterday, though I imagine you weren't expecting to see me here today." Ethan swallowed hard. "No, sir, I wasn't." Isaac's eyes held his, unwavering. "I've heard a lot about you, Ethan. I hope you'll be open to the changes we're going to make." Ethan nodded stiffly, unsure of what else to say. "One last thing," Isaac added, leaning in slightly. "In this role, I believe in second chances. Just don't make me regret offering you one." With that, Isaac turned and walked away, leaving Ethan standing there, feeling more exposed than he'd ever felt in his life. He knew this was just the beginning, but he had no idea how much his life was about to change. Isaac's reveal as chief challenges Ethan's understanding of power and sets the tone for the conflict and transformation. Isaac Turner sat behind his new desk at the Greenville police station, the smell of fresh paint mingling with the old scent of the building. The weight of his new role bore down on him, but he wore it well, a calm confidence radiating from his posture. His eyes scanned the files spread before him, each one a record of the station's history, the good and the bad. A soft knock interrupted his thoughts, and Samantha Morales, his trusted deputy, stepped in. "Ready to take on the world, Chief?" she teased, offering a warm smile. "One step at a time, Sam," Isaac replied, leaning back in his chair. "We've got a lot of work ahead of us." Sam's expression grew serious. "You know they're already talking, right? Especially about you and Ethan McCall." Isaac nodded, the memory of their encounter still fresh. "I'm not here to play favorite, Sam, but I also won't shy away from addressing what needs to be fixed." "You think he'll listen?" she asked, skepticism in her tone. "He will," Isaac replied firmly. "One way or another, he will." Isaac's determination to confront Ethan sets the stage for the coming tension, preparing for their inevitable clash. Ethan sat in his dimly lit living room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table in front of him. The events of the day replayed in his mind like a broken record. How had he been so blind? How had he allowed his anger and frustration to guide him so recklessly? He took another swig, wincing at the burn, and picked up his phone, his finger hovering over Captain Riley's number. He wanted to talk, to vent, to understand how everything had gone so wrong, but instead he put the phone down with a sigh. "Pathetic," he muttered to himself. "You're just scared." The knock on his door startled him, and for a moment he considered ignoring it. But something pulled him to answer. Standing there was Captain Riley, looking both annoyed and concerned. "Mind if I come in?" Riley asked without waiting for an answer, pushing past Ethan into the living room. "What are you doing here?" Ethan slurred, blinking in surprise. "Making sure you don't do something stupid," Riley replied sharply. He glanced at the bottle on the table. "Too late for that, I see." Ethan sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. I screwed up, didn't I? Yeah, you did, Riley agreed, sitting across from him. But that doesn't mean it's over. You can still fix this. But you've got to be willing to face the man you wronged. Ethan swallowed, the taste of whiskey turning sour. And if I don't? Then you've lost before you've even begun, Riley said simply. Captain Riley's intervention pushes Ethan to confront his actions, leading him to the next confrontation with Isaac. The following day, Ethan stood in the training room with the other officers, waiting for the mandatory meeting that Isaac had called. He could feel eyes on him, whispers that grew louder the moment he looked away. His gut twisted, but he forced himself to stand tall. Isaac entered, calm and collected, and every voice fell silent. He walked to the front, meeting each officer's gaze before finally settling on Ethan. We're going to change the way we do things, Isaac began. No more of the us versus them mentality. We are here to serve, not to rule. We're going to start treating this community like what it is, our community. A murmur spread through the room, and Ethan couldn't help himself. And you think you can just waltz in and change everything overnight? His voice was sharper than he intended, but he didn't back down. Isaac's eyes met his, unflinching. No, Officer McCall, I don't expect to change everything overnight, but I do expect you to be part of the solution, not the problem. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. Ethan felt the weight of everyone's eyes on him, waiting for his response. And what if I don't agree with how you want to fix things? Isaac stepped closer, his voice low but firm. Then you're welcome to find another place to work. Ethan stared at him, the challenge clear, but instead of anger, he felt something else. Respect. And maybe, just maybe, a spark of hope. Isaac's direct challenge forces Ethan to confront his role in the problem, making him more open to seeing things from a new perspective. Later that day, Captain Riley drove Ethan into the community center in Jackson Heights. Ethan was silent, still reeling from the confrontation, but Riley wasn't having it. Listen, kid, Riley said gruffly. You're not the first officer to make a mistake, and you won't be the last. But you have a chance to fix it. So pay attention today. As they stepped into the community center, Ethan was overwhelmed by the warmth of the space. Bright murals covered the walls, and children laughed as they played in the corner. A group of adults sat in a circle, deep in discussion. An older woman, her hair streaked with gray, approached them. You must be the officers, she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Welcome, I'm Mrs. Jenkins. Thank you, ma'am, Riley replied, giving Ethan a nudge. This is Officer McCall. Ethan forced a smile, feeling out of place. It's nice to meet you. Is it? Mrs. Jenkins asked, one eyebrow raised, because the last time we met an officer from your station, he didn't even look us in the eye. Ethan swallowed hard, but Riley stepped in. We're here to listen today, Mrs. Jenkins. Nothing more. For the next hour, Ethan listened as community members shared their experiences, their fears, and their frustrations. One story stood out. A single mother, her voice trembling as she described her son's fear every time he saw a police car. I just want him to feel safe, she said, tears streaming down her face. Is that too much to ask? Ethan's heart clenched, and for the first time, he felt the full weight of his actions. He had seen these people as problems, obstacles to be dealt with, but now he saw them as people, just like him. This experience plants a seed of empathy in Ethan, breaking down the barriers he'd built around himself. That evening, Ethan found himself sitting in a small diner near the station, nursing a cup of coffee. He was lost in thought when someone slid into the seat across from him. Mind if I join you? Samantha Morales asked, flashing a quick smile. Ethan shrugged. Free country. They sat in silence for a moment before Sam spoke. You know, you're not the first officer to have a run-in with Isaac, but you might be the first one who's actually willing to listen. Ethan looked up, surprised. And what makes you think I'm listening? Because you're still here, Sam replied simply. Most guys would have run by now. He laughed bitterly. Maybe I'm just too stubborn to quit. Or maybe you're starting to realize that the world doesn't revolve around you. Sam shot back, her tone gentle but firm. Look, Isaac sees something in you, even if you don't see it yet. Don't waste that chance. Ethan stared at her, the weight of her words sinking in. Why do you care? Because I've seen what happens when good cops let their pride get in the way. Sam said, standing up. Don't be one of them. As she walked away, Ethan felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. For the first time, he believed that maybe, just maybe, he could be more than his past mistakes. Samantha's words pushed Ethan to reflect on his choices. Ethan stood in the briefing room, arms crossed, listening to Isaac as he assigned cases to the team. His stomach knotted when Isaac handed him a folder. "McCall," Isaac said, "you'll be handling this one." Ethan flipped open the folder, frowning at the headline, "Tensions Rise Between Local Businesses." The case involved a dispute between a black-owned store and a white-owned one, each accusing the other of misconduct. "Why me?" Ethan asked, trying to keep his tone neutral. Isaac met his gaze steadily. "Because I believe you can handle it fairly. Consider this an opportunity to prove that you're willing to change." Ethan stiffened, tempted to argue, but something in Isaac's eyes stopped him. There was no judgment, only an invitation. He nodded. "I'll handle it." As he left the room, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this case was about more than just a business dispute. It was a test, one that would force him to confront his biases. Isaac's decision to assign Ethan the case challenges him to reevaluate his assumptions, leading to the next scene's introspection. The drive to his childhood home felt longer than usual. Ethan hadn't planned to visit, but after reading through the case file, he felt a pull to return to where it all started. His mother greeted him with a smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. "Ethan, what a surprise. You haven't been home in weeks." "I've been busy," he muttered, stepping inside. He could still see the old newspaper clippings about his high school football achievements framed on the wall, a shrine to his past successes. Over coffee, they chatted about mundane things until Ethan finally asked, "Mom, do you remember what you used to say about the people who lived in Jackson Heights?" She looked up sharply. "Why are you asking about that?" "I just need to know," he said quietly. His mother's eyes hardened. "I said the truth. Those people brought trouble." "You know that." Ethan's heart sank. But was it really the truth? Or was it just what we chose to believe? His mother's lips thinned. "You've been spending too much time in that part of town. Remember where you come from, Ethan. Don't let them change you." Ethan left soon after, the conversation replaying in his head. He knew he couldn't keep clinging to the beliefs he'd been raised with. If he wanted to handle this case fairly, he'd have to let go of the past. This painful confrontation with his upbringing pushes Ethan to question his beliefs, leading to the next interaction with Isaac. Isaac sat in his office, shoulders tense as he read a report about the rising tensions in Greenville. Samantha walked in, closing the door behind her. "You look like you've seen better days, Chief." Isaac sighed, leaning back. "It's harder than I thought, Sam. I knew this wouldn't be easy, but I didn't expect so much resistance." "That's the thing about change," Sam replied. "People don't like it, especially when it threatens their comfort." Isaac rubbed his temples. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm making a difference." Sam leaned forward, resting her hand on his desk. "You are. But you can't carry this burden alone. Let Ethan help you. He's rough around the edges, but I think he's starting to see things differently." Isaac nodded thoughtfully. "He's got potential, but he's still fighting himself." "Then give him a reason not to," Sam suggested. "Show him that you believe in him." Isaac managed a small smile. "Thanks, Sam. I needed that." Isaac's renewed determination prepares him for his next confrontation with Ethan. Ethan waited in the police station parking lot, pacing back and forth. He needed answers, and there was only one person who could give them to him. He saw Isaac approaching and stepped in front of him. "We need to talk," Ethan said, his voice tense. Isaac raised an eyebrow. "About what?" "This case," Ethan replied, holding up the folder. "You're testing me. Why?" Isaac crossed his arms. "Because you need to be tested. You've spent years seeing the world through one lens. It's time you saw it from another perspective." "And what if I fail?" Ethan challenged. "Then you fail," Isaac said bluntly. "But at least you'll know you tried." Ethan shook his head. "It's not that simple." "Yes, it is," Isaac countered. "You became a cop to help people, right? Then prove it. Help these people. Don't let your fears dictate who you become." Ethan stared at him, feeling something shift inside. "I'll do it," he said finally. "But not for you. For me." Isaac nodded. "That's all I ask." Isaac's challenge forces Ethan to confront his fears and resolve to change. leading to his pivotal decision in the final scene. Ethan was patrolling Jackson Heights when he heard the commotion. He turned a corner to see another officer, one he recognized as a longtime colleague, roughly shoving a young black teenager against a wall. "Hey!" Ethan shouted, running over. "What's going on?" The officer sneered. "Stay out of this, McCall. This kid needs to learn some respect." Ethan's heart raced, but he didn't back down. "You're out of line. Let him go." "Or what?" the officer taunted. "You gonna protect him? Since when did you care about this neighborhood?" "Since I realized I've been part of the problem," Ethan shot back. "Now let him go." The officer released the boy, glaring at Ethan. "You're making a mistake, McCall." "No," Ethan said firmly. "I'm finally doing something right." As the officer stormed off, Ethan turned to the teenager. "Are you okay?" The boy nodded, eyes wide with fear and gratitude. "Thank you." Ethan felt a weight lift from his shoulders. "It's my job." From a distance, Isaac watched the exchange, a hint of a smile on his lips. For the first time, he believed that Ethan McCall might truly be capable of change. This moment solidifies Ethan's resolve to be a better person. The atmosphere in the Greenville police station felt tense as Isaac stood in his office, staring at the report in his hands. Malik Hayes, a name from his past, had resurfaced in Greenville, and Isaac knew all too well the danger this man represented. He had been involved in organized crime for years, and his presence in Greenville threatened to unravel all the progress Isaac had made. Samantha entered the room, concern etched on her face. "You heard the news?" she asked. Isaac nodded. "Yeah, Malik's back, and he's not here for a friendly visit." "Why now?" she wondered aloud, her frustration evident. Things were finally starting to change. Isaac sighed. "That's exactly why. He's here to make sure we don't succeed." Sam placed a comforting hand on Isaac's shoulder. "We'll handle this, Chief. You're not alone." Isaac offered a small smile. "I know, but Malik's not going to play fair. He never has." Ethan was leaving the station when he felt a tap on his shoulder. He turned around to see a man he didn't recognize, a sharp suit, slicked back hair, and an unsettling smirk. "Officer McCall, right?" "Who's asking?" Ethan replied warily. "The name's Malik Hayes," the man said smoothly. "We've got a mutual acquaintance, Isaac Turner." Ethan's stomach dropped. "What do you want?" "Just a little chat," Malik said, slipping a piece of paper into Ethan's hand. "You might find the information on there interesting. It could change everything you think you know about your new boss." Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm not interested." Malik's smile widened. "Oh, but you will be, and when you are, you know where to find me." Ethan stood there, staring at the piece of paper in his hand, his mind racing. He knew he should turn it in, but the temptation to read it gnawed at him. After a long moment, he crumpled the paper and shoved it into his pocket. Making his way to Isaac's office, Isaac looked up as Ethan entered. "What's up, McCall?" Ethan took a deep breath and dropped the crumpled paper on Isaac's desk. "Malik tried to get to me. I'm not interested in whatever game he's playing." Isaac's expression softened with gratitude. "Thank you, Ethan. I know that wasn't easy." Ethan shrugged. "It's not about easy. It's about doing the right thing." Isaac stood outside the small, worn-down church where he'd spent countless Sundays as a child. He hadn't been here in years, but he needed guidance now more than ever. Stepping inside, he found the old pastor sitting in the front pew, flipping through a well-worn Bible. "Isaac Turner," the pastor greeted, a warm smile spreading across his face. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Isaac agreed, taking a seat next to him. The pastor studied him for a moment. "I heard you've taken on quite a responsibility." Isaac sighed. "And now it feels like it's slipping away. Malik Hayes is back." The pastor nodded thoughtfully. "He's always been a troublemaker, but you knew this day would come." "I did," Isaac admitted, "but I thought I'd be more prepared." The pastor placed a comforting hand on Isaac's shoulder. "You are prepared, Isaac. You have people who believe in you. Rely on them." "I have a young officer," Isaac said slowly. "He's trying to change, but I'm afraid I'm dragging him into a fight he's not ready for." The pastor smiled. "Maybe he's exactly where he needs to be. Sometimes we don't choose our battles, they choose us." Isaac nodded, feeling a renewed sense of resolve. "Thank you, Pastor." "Go on," the pastor said with a chuckle. "And don't let that Malik Hayes steal your light." The community center in Jackson Heights was a hub of activity, filled with children laughing and adults chatting. Ethan stood by, helping with a charity event Isaac had organized, and for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of peace. Suddenly, there was a loud crash. A group of men stormed in, carrying spray paint cans and baseball bats. They began vandalizing the walls, shattering windows, and knocking over tables. Ethan's heart raced as he watched in disbelief, recognizing one of the men as someone who'd been with Malik earlier. Ethan jumped into action, grabbing one of the men by the arm. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" the man sneered. "Sending a message." Isaac appeared beside Ethan, his face set in a grim line. "Get out. Now." "You don't get to tell us what to do," the man snarled. "Yes, I do," Isaac replied calmly, his voice carrying authority. "And if you're smart, you'll leave before the cops show up." Reluctantly, the men backed down, leaving the center in shambles. As they left, Ethan looked around at the damage, his heart sinking. Isaac placed a hand on his shoulder. "This is what we're up against." Ethan nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on him. "Then we fight back." Ethan and Isaac walked through a dimly lit alley in Jackson Heights, the tension between them palpable. They knew Malik would be waiting, and they were ready for whatever came next. As they approached the meeting spot, Malik stepped out of the shadows, flanked by two men. "Ah, Isaac Turner, and you brought your little protege. How touching." "Enough games, Malik," Isaac said coldly. "Why are you here?" "To remind you that no matter how hard you try, you'll never escape your past," Malik taunted. "And neither will he." He nodded toward Ethan. Ethan clenched his fists. "You don't scare me." "Maybe not," Malik said with a smirk, "but I know you're kind. You'll always be one step away from slipping back into who you used to be." Isaac stepped forward, his voice steady. "You're right, Malik. We can't escape our pasts, but we can choose to be better." Malik laughed. "You think you've changed? You think this boy has changed? You're living a fantasy, Isaac." "Maybe," Isaac admitted. "But it's a better one than the nightmare you're trying to create." The two groups stood there, locked in a silent battle of wills. Finally, Malik sighed. "This isn't over, Isaac, not by a long shot." "It is if we make it over," Ethan said, stepping forward. "You don't have power here anymore." For a moment, Malik stared at Ethan, then turned and walked away, his men following him. Ethan exhaled, the adrenaline leaving his body all at once. "Good job," Isaac said quietly. "You stood your ground." Ethan nodded, a sense of accomplishment washing over him. "I learned from the best." Ethan stood in front of his fellow officers in the briefing room, heart pounding. He knew what he had to do, and there was no turning back now. Isaac watched him from the back, an encouraging nod giving him the strength he needed. "I owe you all an apology," Ethan began, his voice shaking but steadying with each word. "I've let my own biases and anger cloud my judgment. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I was wrong. And I know I have a long way to go to earn back your trust." There were murmurs among the officers, some nodding in acknowledgement, others still skeptical. Ethan took a deep breath. "But I'm committed to changing, not just for myself, but for this department and the community we serve. We need to do better, and that starts with me." The room fell silent. Captain Riley stepped forward, clapping a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Takes a real man to admit when he's been wrong, McCall. We'll all be watching to see if your actions back up your words." Ethan nodded, grateful but also aware that the hardest part was yet to come. Late that night, Isaac sat alone in his office, reviewing paperwork. The station was nearly empty when he heard the faint creak of the door. Before he could react, two masked men burst in, one of them carrying a gun. "Stay quiet, and this'll be over quick," one of the men growled. Isaac's heart raced, but he kept his voice calm. "You don't have to do this," the man sneered. "Malik sends his regards." Isaac tried to move, but the second man swung a baton, and pain exploded in his side. He collapsed onto the floor, clutching his ribs as the men ransacked his office. He reached for his phone, barely managing to dial Ethan's number before the darkness swallowed him. Ethan's voice crackled through the speaker. Isaac, are you there?" Isaac struggled to speak. "Ethan, Malik. Hang on, I'm coming." Ethan's voice sounded distant, desperate, but it was the last thing Isaac heard before everything went black. Ethan drove through the rain-slicked streets, heart pounding, until he reached the abandoned warehouse where Malik was known to operate. Every instinct told him to wait for backup, but he couldn't afford to waste time. Isaac's life depended on him. He entered cautiously, gun drawn, moving through the shadows until he saw Malik standing in the center of the room. Samantha was tied to a chair nearby, her eyes wide with fear but defiant. "Well, if it isn't Officer McCall," Malik taunted, smirking. "Here to save the day?" "Let her go, Malik," Ethan demanded, aiming his gun at him. "It's over." Malik laughed. "Over? This has barely started. You think you're the hero now? You're just a scared little boy playing at being a man." Ethan stepped closer, his grip tightening on his weapon. "I've made my mistakes, but I'm not that man anymore." Malik's eyes narrowed. "You'll always be that man. You can't change." "That's where you're wrong," Ethan said, lowering his gun slightly. "I already have." In that moment, Malik lunged forward, pulling out a knife. Ethan reacted on instinct, twisting his arm and knocking the blade away. They struggled, grappling for control, but Ethan remembered Isaac's teachings: focus, patience, and the power to choose his actions. With a final surge of strength, Ethan threw Malik to the ground, pinning him there until Samantha managed to cut her bonds with the discarded knife. She stood up, kicking the weapon out of Malik's reach. "It's over," Ethan said, breathless. "You're done." Malik glared at him, hatred burning in his eyes, but he knew he was beaten. Isaac slowly opened his eyes, blinking against the harsh hospital lights. He groaned as the pain in his ribs flared up, but relief washed over him when he saw Ethan sitting by his bedside. "You look like hell," Ethan said, a tired smile tugging at his lips. Isaac chuckled, wincing at the effort. "I feel worse." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have been there sooner." Isaac shook his head. "You were there when it mattered. That's what counts." Ethan swallowed hard, the weight of everything he'd been through pressing down on him. "You gave me a second chance when I didn't deserve one. I won't waste it." Isaac's eyes softened. "You've proven yourself, Ethan, but remember, this journey isn't about a single act of redemption. It's about choosing to be better every day." "I won't forget that," Ethan promised. Isaac nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. "I believe you." The community center in Jackson Heights was alive with laughter and music as people gathered to celebrate. The damage Malik's men had done was long repaired, and the center now stood as a symbol of resilience and hope. Ethan stood by the entrance, watching the celebration unfold. He spotted the single mother he'd met months ago, her young son laughing as he played with other children. She approached him, a grateful smile on her face. "Thank you for everything, Officer McCall." Ethan smiled, humbled. "It wasn't just me. This community did it together." She nodded. "But you were the first one to listen. That means something." Isaac joined Ethan, leaning against the wall. "Not a bad turnout, huh?" "Not bad at all," Ethan agreed, looking out over the crowd. "You did good, Chief." Isaac shook his head. "We did good, together." Ethan nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. "You think Malik will stay down?" "For now," Isaac replied. "But there will always be more battles. That's why we keep fighting." "Yeah," Ethan said quietly. "We keep fighting." As the celebration continued, Ethan glanced over at Isaac, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. They had come a long way, and though there would be more challenges ahead, they were ready to face them together. Ethan stood outside Captain Riley's office, his nerves frayed. He took a deep breath and knocked. "Come in," Riley called. Ethan stepped inside, the captain looking up with an unreadable expression. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Riley leaned back in his chair, studying Ethan. "I heard what you did last night. You saved Isaac's life, stopped Malik, and kept your head when things got tough. That's not the Ethan McCall I used to know." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. People can change. A slow smile spread across Riley's face. "You've proven that, which is why I'm giving you this." He handed Ethan a commendation, a symbol of recognition for bravery and dedication. Ethan took it, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you, Captain." Riley nodded. "It takes courage to change, McCall. I'm proud of you." Isaac sat on his porch enjoying the morning sun and the rare moment of peace. He still felt the dull ache from his injuries, but he was healing, both inside and out. The sound of his phone buzzing pulled him from his thoughts. "Hey, Chief," Samantha's voice greeted him. "You'll be happy to know the department's finally starting to come around. They're actually excited about the new community programs." Isaac chuckled. "Well, miracles do happen." "I thought you'd want to hear the good news," she said warmly. "You made a real difference, Isaac." "Not alone," he replied, thinking of Ethan. How's he doing? Why don't you find out for yourself? Sam suggested. I think it's time for you two to have that talk. Isaac hung up, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. He grabbed his keys and headed out the door. Ethan stood on the front porch of his childhood home, heart pounding. He hadn't been back since his confrontation with his mother, but he knew it was time to face his past. He knocked, and the door swung open. Ethan? His mother looked surprised, her eyes flickering with emotion. Can we talk? He asked softly. She nodded, stepping aside to let him in. They sat in the living room, the silence stretching between them until Ethan finally spoke. I've changed, Mom. I've had to face a lot of hard truths about myself, about how I was raised. His mother's eyes filled with tears. I never meant to. I thought I was protecting you. I know, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion, but I want to be better. I want to be a man who treats people with respect, regardless of where they come from. She reached out, taking his hand. I'm proud of you, Ethan, and I'm sorry if I ever taught you otherwise. Ethan nodded, tears in his eyes. I love you, Mom. I love you too, son, she whispered. Ethan stood in the center of the community room in Jackson Heights, surrounded by a group of teenagers. Their eyes were fixed on him, curious and cautious. I used to think that being a police officer meant having all the answers, Ethan began. But I've learned that it's about asking the right questions. It's about understanding people's stories and doing my part to make things better. A boy raised his hand. So you're saying you weren't always like this? Ethan smiled. No, I wasn't. I had to change, and it wasn't easy. But I'm here to help you see that change is possible for anyone. Isaac stood in the doorway, watching with pride as Ethan connected with the kids. As the group broke up into smaller discussions, Isaac approached him. You're doing a good job. Thanks, Chief, Ethan replied. I'm just trying to follow your example. Isaac clapped him on the shoulder. You're not following me anymore, Ethan. You're leading. Ethan and Isaac walked side by side through the streets of Jackson Heights, the neighborhood bustling with life. They paused at the spot where they had first met, the memory of that day still vivid. Feels like a lifetime ago, Ethan remarked. It was, Isaac said quietly. You're not the same man you were then. And neither are you, Ethan pointed out. You took a chance on me when no one else would. I'll never forget that. Isaac nodded, a smile tugging at his lips. You've proven that people can change, Ethan. But remember, this journey doesn't end here. It's something you'll have to work at every single day. Ethan glanced around at the people passing by, nodding to a woman who smiled at him. I'm ready for it. Whatever comes next, I'm ready. They stood there for a moment, two men who had faced their own darkness and come out stronger for it. As they turned to walk back, Isaac gave Ethan a final piece of advice. The real strength isn't in changing the world all at once. It's in being the change, one day at a time. Ethan nodded, his heart full. I won't forget. And as they walked together through Jackson Heights, Ethan felt the warmth of the sun on his face, the weight of his past lifting with each step. For the first time, he felt truly free.